Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For the free wire tutorial today, we're going to make phantom zone earrings. Now, I've already created one, but I'm going to take you through every step of the way to create these as a beautifully matched pair. Let's head down to the board, take a closer look, and then we'll make a pair of earrings together. The Phantom Zone earrings are entirely inspired by the 1970s movie Superman, starring Christopher Reeve and Terence Stamp, among many other fabulous actors. I'm just going to pop that down on the crescent moon. Now, I've already created a matched pair for that earring, but what I'm going to do is take you through the entire process from beginning to end. So what we need are two 10-inch lengths of 1mm or 18 gauge wire, and I'm just going to trim them so that they match approximately the same length. I'm also going to make sure that both ends are flush cut and that wire is lovely and fluid. Now, if they're not exactly the same to begin with, it doesn't matter. We have the opportunity to just tidy that up. The main thing is to get that wire nice and fluid to help us along the way. It's a bit chilly today, so I'm taking all the help I can get. I'm going to come just over halfway along that length from one end. I'm going to pop in a really sharp bend. So if I just take that plier away, you'll see it's quite a defined bend. I'm going to take that a little bit further along than you would imagine, and then just draw that away. What I'm going to do here is separate them out and just make sure that I'm happy with how sharp that angle change is. And that's a little easier to do once they are not on top of one another. So you can open and close that just a tiny bit, and it just enhances the sharpness of the angle. You will then want to restack them to make sure that you keep that angle the same on both sides. Now, I am not the person that understands the names of particular triangle shapes. I know there's an isosceles and equilateral, but as to which one is which, I really don't remember. School was a long time ago. So making sure that those two pieces of wire are stacked one on top of the other, I'm going to create the next bend of wire. So I'm going to push that all the way back over. Now, at the moment, both of those wires have gone far further across than I want, and this is a really helpful way to make a very sharp bend. I'm now going to bring those wires back up and take the top wire and gently coerce it over the top of the form, and then push that back into position. So you can see that you're making pairs of triangular forms. The reason I want to have one wire going over the top and one wire underneath, as you can see here, the uprights are in the center, is because when I want to wrap the shorter tail here around the upright, I will want it to be symmetrical. So I want my earrings to appear with the points going outwards, or at least they need to be symmetrically opposing. So once I've decided that that is indeed the triangle form I want to use, I'm going to grip those two pieces of wire together again, making sure that they are sitting equally one on top of the other. And then I'm going to create a sideways bend with these two wires. Now, you can just pop the pliers across and then push those wires down individually. Probably would be actually a little bit easier to do that with a set of straight pliers, but I have misplaced mine this morning. So at this stage, do take your time to make sure that these two items match. So I can see that that's ever so slightly on the wonk. So I'm just going to take that away from the other one for a second and make sure that I refine that bend and that then they both match together. Once I've got those two pieces matching, I'm going to pop one out of the way for a moment. I'm just going to straighten that bit up because it's ever so slightly wibbly wobbly. And then I'm going to bring in a block and hammer. Now, the wire I'm demonstrating with is a bronze colour copper core, and the wire that I'm making the jewellery with in a moment is a raw copper. This is my preferred wire to work with. However, I've got a massive amount of this bronze that I'm working my way through. It's a beautiful colour, it's just not the nicest wire in the world. So you can see at the moment I'm working on the item which has the wrapping going over the top. So in order to hammer this safely, I'm just going to drop that part off the edge and just hammer on the angle first. And I'm going to retain the shape by pressing down where the wire crosses over the upright. So if I just hold that still, Now, in working these 2 angle changes, we've really solidified the design already. So in a moment, I'll turn this around and I'll work on hardening up that backbone of the design as well. Let's just move that slightly further into the light. When I come to hammer the opposite number, I will want to hammer in the opposite direction. So I will create the exact same form, but they're symmetrically opposite to one another, in so much as the bend occurs above that core or that upright wire. So I'm going to hammer the second one in exactly the same way, but in opposition. Once I have done both of those, I'm going to meet you back in a second and show you just how to wrap that section over the top. When you're working on earrings, it really does pay to take a second to make them symmetrical, because although they appear on different sides of the head, having them be markedly different and then displaying them for sale, people will pick up on it. If you are gifting them as well, just take an extra couple of moments to make that as beautiful as it possibly can be. Now, at any point during the hammering, you might get mild deviations in that project. So again, just drop them back so that they are in symmetry with one another, and make sure that if you make any changes on one, you reflect that on the other, keeping them as similar as possible. These actually look to be fairly reasonable, but do take your time on that aspect. The next thing we're going to do is to tie the bendy end to the main core, making sure that the upright section is the same size on both earrings, because that will indeed be the thing that looks most different. So take a second, just get those lined up, and if you're happy, move on. So what we're going to do now is to take fairly fine tipped pliers, these are my bent chain nose pliers, and grip just across that little angle change up at the top there. Now the reason I grip across here and then push the wire back, which we didn't hammer, we only hammered the 3 sides of that triangular form, push that back in a straight line. So it goes straight away from the top of that angle change. The reason we grip across the angle change is because it gives us a tiny smidge of bendy wire just at the top there, which you can grip onto with those pliers as you then push the tail of the wire around. Now, one of the reasons I use bent chain nose pliers is because I can grip and then move my plier head slightly out of the way. So I'm going to draw that tail all the way around and allow that to tighten up. Give it a little tiny bit of a squish, and what we're looking to see is just that tiniest bit of angle change from the side of the triangle to that straight line over to the 9 o'clock position, just the tiniest bit up at the top, and that will help us to ensure that both pairs of earrings are indeed exactly the same. So if you grip then across these 2 bars of the triangle, you can take that little tail round to the back and trim away any excess, which is why a minor variation in the size of that wire didn't really matter. I'm just going to give that little bit of wire at the back a tiny squish and make sure that that sits down neatly and that the cut end is as close to that upright core as possible. You'll then need to do exactly the same on the other side. So when you're making earrings, make them in reflection of one another in a mirror image, and when you do one bit, do the same bit on the other side. I'm going to discard that for now because you don't need to see me making everything twice. Once you've got that tied together and you've checked that both of your triangles are exactly the same as one another, and it doesn't matter whether the top line is the same as the bottom line unless you have a specific aesthetic you're looking to recreate. Once you've got this really neatly tied up at the top, we're going to pop across with the fine tip of some pliers to create a small gap. And then I'm going to push that wire forwards up at the top of that design. I'm then going to create a small loop. I just realised I went forwards instead of sideways. Whoop! There we go. You get to do that once. Just once. The reason I'm going sideways is because the earring finding I'm using comes forwards. So those need to be at 90 degrees to one another. So you can generally get away with it once if you need to twist that around. Your other alternative, if you don't feel confident just changing that wire around, is to use a jump ring between the 2 component parts. I'm going to use the 2mm pin on my memory wire finishing pliers, and I'm just going to rotate that wire around to create a round form. Now, because the cut end is going over in that direction, I will want my wire to come underneath. And in that way we can create a seamless join. Centralise your round form up at the top. You can pop it back on that 2mm pin if you need to. And then we're going to bring that tail all the way around. If that gets a little bit baggy, you can tighten that up. And then we're just going to fill that gap between the wrap that we've just created at the top of the triangle and the wrap underneath that loop, which will go into the earring finding, and then going to draw that wire almost to the point where it meets the other cut end, trim away. Could probably trim away another 0.5 millimeter. Just going to show you that sideways, putting my finger over the end to prevent that little cut bit from going awry. I lost a camera to it once, never again. And then we're going to just pinch those two cut ends together. So once you've achieved that, we're ready to move on to the next stage. Once you've got your matched pair of triangles, I mean, they're fairly quirky as they are, and you could simply layer up geometric shapes like this. You could add circles, you could even add some washers and just go for something really funky. But I'm going to show you now how to turn them into my Phantom Zone earrings. I do like that film, it's great. Let's head back down to the board and we'll move on to the final stage. We're now going to add in our next wire. I'm working with 0.4mm or 26 gauge. I have a 24-inch length of the wire and you'll need 2 of those. So let's have a look at how we have added the beads onto the first earring, as we'll want to match that. So it's going down the side of the triangle rather than down the straight bit. And we're also going to be starting with the main wire coming from underneath. So to reflect that, what I'm going to do is to push the tail of wire through. And I'm going to go for 3 wraps with the long tail of wire coming up inside that frame. Now you can utilise your pliers to help you get in there. I'm going to go for 3 wraps and then I'll push that wire up towards the top of that triangle. So I'm not overly worried about a teeny tiny bit of copper wire. If you are indeed using a precious metal to recreate the Phantom Zone earrings, then you might want to be a little bit more thrifty. Once I've got those really neat 3 wraps, I'm going to scoot that up towards the top. And again, I'm just checking to make sure that I'm making these in a mirror image. So the wire wrap of 3 doesn't go all the way up to the top because we will need to get a bead in. So at the cut end of my wire, let's move this little baby up to the top. I'm going to add on my first bead. This is a 3mm round bead and I'm working with some beautiful gemstones that Fleur sent me for the October Relax and Craft box, and these are ice obsidian. When I received them I thought they might be smoky quartz, but on closer inspection they're a slightly cooler colourway. Smoky quartz is a slightly warmer colour. So let's allow that to zip down into position. Whoosh, there it goes, and I'm just going to turn this to make my life easier. So the finer gauge wire started underneath that frame, and I'm just going to push that bead so that it sits as high up in that little quadrant up at the top as it possibly can. I'm going to make sure that I grip that bead very firmly. Then I'm going to bring the tail of wire all the way around, push it up through the middle. Now if you have hot hands, you might like to draw that through with something metal to stop it from getting very, very warm. But what we do want to do is get a little bit of tension. We're supporting and protecting the bead with our hands and then bringing that wire all the way through. Now if you do get a curl like this in your wire, don't be tempted to pull that through. Open that back up. Your wire will thank you and will last longer and is much less likely to fracture. So I'm going to go for 3 wraps between each bead, but I will just refer to my first earring to make sure that that is indeed what I did. It is indeed, because, you know, lady of a certain age, I sometimes forget things. So once you have got that 3 little wraps into position, we're going to add in our next bead. And again, there's a little kink in the wire. I'm working with a fine wire. We're going to add on the next bead and then I will work through. I'll come back and see you there in just a moment, but let's get this one more bead added on. Draw that down into position. Again, we're going to sit it neatly against the framework. And another thing that I'm going to take pains to do is to count the number of beads I've used in the first leg of this design and make sure that I use the same number of beads again. So we can do a count, put that number of beads out, and then we will join together in a moment to meet just here. Now, as you get closer to that first angle change, you may find that you need to scoot your beads slightly closer together to match the tension of your first earring to ensure that you get all of the beads in. Now, I counted and I had 9 before the one that sits in that little nook where the angle change takes place. So I popped the remainder of those beads on the board to ensure that I didn't overshoot. It's very easy to get distracted and just keep on adding beads. So I'm just going to scoot these up a little bit to ensure that I can get these last 2 beads in and still have space just in that little angle change there. So I have those 9 beads set in the first section of my triangle, my phantom zone earrings, and I'm just going to make sure that they're sitting really neatly and evenly, that the tension is good and they're not going to go anywhere. That first bead really does need to be firmly in that gap up at the top. And what we have now is enough space in this little angle change to add our next bead. So I'm going to grab the next of those beautiful little 3mm ice obsidians. I'm going to slide that onto the end of the wire and drop that all the way down. What you'll see now is that that nestles really neatly into that little triangular section. So we're going to bring the wire from underneath, as we have done all the way along, through the bead, hold it into position and then over the top of that frame. So it's a halo, a classic haloing design, and then we're going to wrap 3 times, as we have done multiple times now. And what we're looking to achieve is a really nice sense of spacing, even spacing between each of those beads. And you can just offer them up to make sure that they look as similar as possible. So that all looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to now count how many beads I need to get into this lower part of my phantom zone earring. So I've counted and there are 8 beads on that lower line of the phantom zone earring. So I'm going to add those in exactly the same way as we have done before, beginning underneath the frame, wrapping through the bead, holding the bead firmly in position, taking the wire over the top of the frame. So I'll meet you back down on the board in just a second. I've added my 8th and final bead on the lower section of this earring, and what I'm going to do is just put a little bit of extra tension to scooch those beads up to make sure that I can get those last 3 wraps really neatly around this section of frame. So I'm just going to push that wire through and then make sure that that pulls down neatly. So I've got 2 wraps so far. I just need to get 1 extra one in all the way around, and it just sneaks in really neatly. So let's take this to the rear of the design, trim that away as close as we possibly can to the frame, and then we're just going to tuck that end inside the frame. Nice and neat, and then you can redistribute those beads. Just be very, very gentle. These have been an absolute dream to work with. But if you're working with a fragile bead, just be very careful. Moving those down slightly, all that remains then to complete the phantom zone earring is to add in your chosen earring finding. So let's open that up, make sure that it's facing the correct way, which is a classic problem that I always end up doing. Have I done that again? Every single time I put that in the wrong way round. I think I have. No, that works. Should have trusted myself. So just close your earring finding up. And then you are good to go. Phantom zone earrings, all ready to wear. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed the phantom zone earrings with me today. I think they hang and move really beautifully. You could even do multiple triangles on one ear and have them layered up over the top of one another. If you have a moment, please do drop a like and a comment on today's video, as it helps me to be seen by the wider community. Sharing is caring, as is dropping a hype on today's video tutorial. Have yourself an amazing day, and I look forward to seeing you back again soon. Bye for now.